I think this would be a surprise to a lot of people around the world how generous our country is, and I love that about being an American.
Our entrepreneurs gave over $19 million to charities. And again, that was just from the 200 plus entrepreneurs that we work with our fractional family offices. Far too often we see entrepreneurs, hey, do you have a trust? Yeah. And then they do have a trust. They have the document, they signed it, they notarized it. And then you look up the title to their real estate, the title to their investment accounts, the title to the private equity, the crypto, and it's all in their personal name.
There's some teeth in these rules. So even if someone, let's say two people are living together and they show up at a hospital because one got in a car accident, you don't have a healthcare power of attorney. You have not designated that person to make decisions for you in this medical situation. Even with spouses, it can be challenging because hospitals are afraid of getting sued.
Prince died 2016, no will, no trust, nothing. Estate was estimated to be worth $200-300 million. Michael Jackson was halfway there. He had what a lot of entrepreneurs had. He had a trust, but he never funded it. Jim, welcome back.
Good to see you.
The Make Rich Real podcast. We are back. We cannot be stopped. Our momentum is off of.
Watch out, Joe Rogan. We're coming for you.
Joe Rogan. Yeah, you better watch out. Just give us.
He has a few more listeners than we do.
Just a few.
Yeah.
You know, we'll take. Let's see. This is year 27 of the business.
Yeah.
Your Rome was not built in a day.
No.
Imagine 27 more years of podcasting.
Yeah.
You think eventually we would get to a stage where we're a fraction of Joe Rogan?
Yeah. You know, the things I've seen in my life, I wouldn't say anything's impossible. I know 27 years from now, I'll be 27 years older.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But maybe at that stage, it's not actually Jim Do. It's maybe just like a digital avatar that AI helped create.
I'm sure.
And you're not physically here anymore. I mean, maybe I'm not even physically here anymore, right?
Maybe I'm physically here, but I'm a cyborg run by AI.
Even better.
Based on my personality.
Do you think your dad jokes will get better?
That's a high bar. I think there's more chance we're bigger than Joe Rogan than my dad jokes could get better. They're kind of up at the top of as good as they can get, I think.
Okay. You know what? If that's what you need to tell yourself to get through the nights, then that is okay. There can be worse things. Well, I'm excited. We're going to jump in. This is going to be really heavily focused on charitable planning, and then we're going to dovetail that into estate planning. Charitable planning, I think, is a very exciting and fun topic. Our entrepreneur clients love to talk about it. Estate planning, I think the intergenerational wealth transfer and tax mitigation, exciting, but the basic blocking and tackling, super, super important, but not the most enthralling topic. But we're going to make it fun, and we're going to make sure that entrepreneurs who listen understand the importance of the basic blocking and tackling when it comes to estate planning.
Yeah, there's a lot of little things that get missed that shouldn't get missed by entrepreneurs or anyone, but especially entrepreneurs should know better.
Yep. All right. Well, last summer, when July 4th, 2025, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act was passed, President Trump's signature tax bill, we broke down a lot of the key changes to entrepreneurs last summer in our episodes in August, September, and thereabout. Now that we're in 2026, let's talk through one of the big changes, which is charitable deductions. Specifically, every single taxpayer now has a 0.5% floor on charitable deductions. Said another way is that only if you contribute more than 0.5% of your adjusted gross income, which think about that as kind of like all the income that's reported on your tax return, then only the amount above that is actually deductible. Less than that, not even deductible. So there's new rules that entrepreneurs need to be aware of here.
Yeah, and let's put some numbers to that. So if you have $1 million of adjusted gross income, that means the first $5,000 that you donate, you get no charitable deduction for. If you make $2 million, the first $10,000 that you donate, you get zero charitable deduction for that.
What do you think the policy reason behind this is? This is one that I cannot figure out.
I believe that when they're trying to get the One Big Beautiful Bill through, they've got to make it pencil out with the budget and the 10-year projections and all those kinds of things. So even though they were continuing a lot of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, they wanted to add some other things in here, like no tax on tips and some other stuff that they put in. And so to counteract that, they had to put something in there that was, positive to the budget. And so this is one easy way to do it. A lot of people didn't even know this happened, but this is a takeaway because it used to be if you made $2 million last year, all of your charitable deduction counted. Now, if you make $2 million, the first $10,000 does not count. And that's taking back some of the tax benefits that you had last year.
Yeah, I think that you're probably right. It's just like what they would call a pay for in order to get some of these other stuff.
It's why so many of them expire and then some don't. The ones they make permanent, and I'm putting that in quotes, just means that it stays until another Congress and president changes the law. But making it permanent, that means that it has to play out in the tax code and the budgets for a long period of time. If it's temporary and it expires in 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, then it doesn't take as big a chunk out of trying to get it through without getting a larger percentage of Congress to vote yes.
Yeah, just like the no tax on tips and the car interest, new car interest, all that stuff was going to fall
It's why
off.
they do phase outs and they do all those other things, is to manage that part of it.
So that is obviously largely very impactful. So the 0.5% floor. On top of that, for our highest income entrepreneurs who are in the 37% tax bracket, which is the highest tax bracket, now the value of these deductions are only 35 cents on the dollar. And so what this says is that if you're in the highest tax bracket, normally if you did give a charitable contribution, you would get a deduction worth that 37 cents. So every $1 you donated to charity would save you 37 cents in taxes. Now it's 35%. So all the highest income earners are also now only getting, again, a deduction for 35 cents on the dollar. So another kind of zinger for the high income Americans and business owners.
Yeah, it's shaving a little bit off. That's what they're doing.
And then there is a 1% corporate deduction floor. So if you are a corporation, now it's not 0.5%. Again, that's not the personal level. Now there's a 1% floor for businesses. So if you're a corporation and you're donating, this would be a C corporation to be particular there, only contributions above 1% are deductible on your 1120 tax return.
Right.
And then there is some good news, I would say, to silver lining is normally you only get charitable deductions if you itemize on Schedule A. So if the total amount of your charitable contributions, mortgage interest, expenditures for healthcare, investment interest, state and local taxes, only if all of that in aggregation is larger than the standard deduction are you actually going to itemize on Schedule A. Now, there's a new rule here, though, that says that even if you are taking the standard deduction, you can still take $1,000 if single or $2,000 if married as an above-the-line charitable contribution. So that's a small workaround, I would say, for that 0.5% floor.
Yeah, and the standard deduction is $16,100 this year. So that's that number. And none of our entrepreneurs are taking the standard deduction.
Yep. Well, I would say none of them. If you are living in Texas, you're capped at $10,000 state and local taxes. And then if you have no mortgage on your home.
Well, you're capped because you make too much money.
Yep.
Right.
Yep. Exactly.
$40,000 unless you, and that phases out from 500 to 600.
And so if you're not charitably inclined and then you have no mortgage on your house, and then if you're making $5 million, your charitable or your health expenditures have to be over 7.5% of $5 million. That's, over $350,000. So there's mortgage-free, debt-free, non-charitably inclined clients that still do the standard deduction.
I guess you're right. I stand corrected. We do have some clients that are doing the standard deduction.
But we'll talk. Most high income and affluent entrepreneurs and taxpayers are actually the most charitably inclined. So it is rare, but they are out there.
True.
So we're going to put up a chart here. This breaks this down just in a visual, an infographic. New 0.5% floor, 35% value of the deduction versus 37%, 1% corporate deduction floor. And then again, the little workaround here is if you are not itemizing, you can take $2,000 off the top if you're a married couple. So that being said, though, the question is will this decrease charitable spending? That was kind of where my thought was going, is that how many people are actually driven from the tax incentive? And I don't think it's probably that many people. I think most people want to tithe, for example, 10% because of their religious beliefs. Whether or not they get a tax deduction, I think, is outside of the scope. But it'll be interesting to see that in 2024, Americans gave $592.5 billion to charity, so up 6.3% since 2023, or year over year. It'll be interesting to see when this data comes out really in 2026, which we won't see until 2027. Is there any type of dip in charitable giving because of some of these tax laws?
Yeah, I don't know if I completely agree that the deduction doesn't matter. I believe the deduction matters a lot. And what they're doing here is not enough to move the needle. But for example, if they limited your charitable deductions to $20,000 and no taxpayer could give more than that, I think you'd see a dramatic change. There'd still be a lot of people that would give, and some would give as much as they always give. But I think you'd see less, because I do think entrepreneurs pay attention to, hey, if I give away $100,000 in a 40% bracket, it saves me $40,000 in taxes. And that is an incentive. And I see that from entrepreneurs at the year end. They're like, hey, could I give some money to charity? Would that help my tax situation? I believe that this isn't enough to change it, but I believe if they completely eliminated the charitable deduction, you'd see a dramatic drop in how much goes to charity. That would be my belief anyway.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think you're spot on. I think this new change to the laws won't necessarily change anything, but I do agree there is a tipping point. So we'll throw a chart up here of where is the money going in 2024 to charities. You can see about 150 billion of it, or about a quarter of it, goes to religion, which makes sense for Christians. Tithing is a big part of some of the people within that religion.
Some people try to buy their way into heaven.
Yeah. Is it working for you?
I don't know.
The price just keeps going up every year.
How would I know?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question.
I got to wait to find out on that.
Human services is going to be number 2 at 90 billion. Education at 88 billion. I know education's a big place where you and Mimi like to contribute, make an impact. Grant making foundations, 72 billion. Then public society benefit, whatever that means. Health, international, arts, culture, humanities, and then environmental and animals. So you and Mimi are a little bit upside down in that animals, which is a big important piece for you. That's only 20 billion. And then I know education, 88 billion. So I think if I were to guess, that's where your money is going.
Yeah, education for sure would be our primary. We do have some other charities we believe in, like some stuff about child trafficking, Tim Tebow's foundation. There's some stuff that we believe in that we give to. Our biggest, though, is helping kids who don't have the financial wherewithal to get through college. So financially supporting them in that is our biggest thing. And we are animal lovers. I mean, we don't have a kid, we have a little dog, and I believe dogs are one of the greatest things on this earth. And I will always say that because they add so much value, have added a lot of value in my life anyway.
Yep, I can't agree more. The furry friends are so important.
Yeah, and they don't grow up and quit college on you. They don't get a drug addiction. They don't. I could go on, but there's things that kids do that dogs don't do.
Very true. All right. Well, transitioning here, America isn't just the wealthiest nation, but it's also, or we are the most generous nation. And it's really driven from the ultra wealthy, and our entrepreneur clients are really in that avatar. Our clients, when we looked at the data in early 2025, so we're working on pulling the data right now, our entrepreneurs gave over $19 million to charities. And again, that was just from the 200 plus entrepreneurs that we work with our fractional family offices. So the data substantiates this. And so as a society, the United States of America contributes around 1.5% to 2% of GDP to charity. And we got a chart here we're going to show that compares us and then New Zealand, Canada, and others. This data is a little bit old. It's from 2016. When I was up kind of doing some preparation here, it looks like we may be closer to 2% now as GDP. But again, not only are we the biggest country from, a GDP per capita perspective, our GDP, I think, is the second biggest behind China in terms of a gross number. But as a percentage of GDP, Americans are by far the most philanthropic.
Yeah, and I love this. I think this would be a surprise to a lot of people around the world, how generous our country is. And I love that about being an American, that we're very generous. I see that we're way above Korea. And I know when Mimi left Korea, that's probably part of the reason for this, because when her family brought her over when she was 5 years old, they lost a very generous person. She'd probably be driving this number up if she was still in Korea.
I think so.
That's sad. She'd be married to some Korean guy that she hated and, obviously not as good looking or talented as me.
If that's the inner monologue that's got to happen, to keep you going, then I'm here for it.
That's my story.
Is there anything else you need to get out of the system there?
No. I just want to know, she came over here and married the right guy. That's all.
Okay, sounds good. The other piece here, as I mentioned or alluded to, affluent Americans leading the way. 2025 Bank of America study on philanthropy, 81% of affluent households made charitable contributions, and the average household gave $33,219, 10x larger than the average gift. So by far, and we see this, as I mentioned, it's the high income earners are the most generous.
Yep. I've seen that, and I remember sitting on a board that I sat on for a number of years, and I was the governance chair. And so we're always talking about getting new people on the board. And the people who served best on the board were the ones who had a lot of money, because they not only did good work on the board, but they gave a lot. And then their friends gave a lot because they were in an affluent community. And I would sometimes struggle with some of the board members who wanted me to look at criteria that maybe brought on a board member that didn't bring in money and didn't have friends who brought in money. I was like, hey, we're trying to raise money as a board in addition to govern. And the people who do that best are the people who are affluent. I mean, I'd love to put people on the board who, don't have any money, but if you do that, you don't have more money for the charity, because those are the most giving people I've met, is the affluent people.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Okay, so as an entrepreneur, there's some vehicles that you can use. Of course, you can just write checks and make gifts. Better yet than that, I mean, that's my least favorite way to gift. Ideally, you'd at least give some appreciated securities to a charity, but there are some vehicles that allow you to be even more efficient with your giving. So we're going to break down 3 today. We're going to break down the Donor Advised Fund, often abbreviated as the DAF, Donor Advised Fund. Then we're going to talk through the private non-operating foundation, and then we're going to juxtapose that against the private operating foundation. So outside of these different vehicles, there's also charitable trust structures. Those generally are going to intertwine estate planning with charitable giving. We're going to narrow the scope here to just 3 really vehicles that are focused solely on giving. So let's break down the Donor Advised Fund. We're going to put a table up here just for the listeners and the viewers. These are super easy to set up. You can set them up for practically for free at Vanguard, Fidelity, Schwab, any of those types of custodians. Very low minimum, $5,000 to $25,000. And if you're contributing cash, you can write off up to 60% of your income. If you are if you are gifting highly appreciated securities like Tesla or Palantir or something like that, you're capped at 30% of your income. And then the way that the Donor Advised,
and if you're over, there's a carry forward.
Yep. There's a 5-year carry forward if you contribute more than that, so you can use it in future years. Very high privacy, no tax filings at all, super simple. Generally, those custodians will only going to charge a fee, maybe 0.25 to 0.5% of the assets per year. And the way that a Donor Advised Fund works is that you get a tax deduction in the year in which you put your stocks or cash in that bucket, but you don't have to give the money to charity in that year. You can let the money grow and compound tax-free in that Donor Advised Fund and give it to any 501c3 you want from this Donor Advised Fund in the future. So it's a very unique structure. It's very accessible, and there is over 1.7 million Donor Advised Funds and over 260 billion in here.
Yeah.
So very interesting structure.
I mean, this is one of my favorites because it's so simple and so low cost to do, and you can name it whatever you want. If your name is Smith, you could call it the Smith Family Foundation, even though it's a DAF. And then you can make this a family thing as well. And I'd recommend that you do this, Bryce, as your kids get older, is you have a DAF, and once a year, each kid can come with a 501c3 charity that they want to be the one that gets the distribution that year. And then you have a family thing where you kind of hammer it out and you get to pick which one. And every year you could do that. And then as the kids get older, in order for them to stay together, as the DAF gets bigger and bigger, you could then turn it over to them. And then hopefully long beyond when you and Leanne are here, maybe your kids are still getting together once a year for the DAF. You can do this with other types of structures as well, but it's a cool thing for very low cost that can help you teach your children about charity and giving and being generous, and also have a reason for them to stay in touch and stay together on something that's purely based on giving and nothing else.
Yeah, I love it. And there's actually a real case study here of an entrepreneur client of ours, ahead of a liquidity event, moved some of her closely held shares into a charitable remainder trust. And then the way that works is that their charitable remainder trust will pay out an annual income stream to the beneficiary, which is the entrepreneur. And then once the entrepreneur and her husband pass away, second to die, the money goes to a charitable beneficiary. So that's why the charity is the remainder of the trust. And who we set up as the beneficiary was the Donor Advised Fund. So then the kids will have access to the Donor Advised Fund. So when mom and dad pass away, all the money flows from the trust into the Donor Advised Fund that the kids will then be able to govern. And then, like you said, starting the distribution committee every single year. And so we're practicing the behavior, and then there'll be probably millions of dollars that floods into this trust, in the next few decades when the parents pass away.
And the charitable remainder trust, that stock, when that company sells or the stock sells, no capital gains tax.
Yep.
So the entire amount goes to work toward paying that distribution, and then of course whatever goes onto the DAF later. Yeah, it's a powerful concept.
Yep, exactly. All right, so let's go into ratcheting up the level of sophistication, but also complexity and cost. We're going to talk about private non-operating foundation. So these will take some time to set up. We'll say we kind of benchmark maybe around 3 months, 3 to 12 months. 3 months is probably realistic. 12 months depending on how good your team is around you. And we'll put the chart up here. It is going to cost generally around $5,000 to $15,000 in legal and accounting fees. Now, one of the big differences here between donor advised funds is that the cap in terms of what percentage of your adjusted gross income you can put in is a lot lower. 30% of cash instead of 60% for donor advised funds, and 20% of appreciated securities. And then one thing that's interesting with these foundations is that you must pay out 5% of your assets every year, because the IRS does not want these just to be tax-free vehicles that accrue, and compound over time. So they want to make sure there's actually public benefit. And so 5% of years or 5% of assets must be distributed. And then the other thing of why a lot of entrepreneurs kind of tend to lean away from this is the administrative burden. You must have a board. You must have, that must be public. And then also you have to have the 990 filed with the IRS. That is also public and searchable. And then if you're invested in any operating businesses or debt finance businesses, you also could have some UBIT, UBTI, and some excise taxes. So this provides a lot more flexibility and creativity, but also it just comes with complexity and stuff to do, so to speak.
Yeah.
Your thoughts on these?
I think it's, like you said, a big step up. There's some advantages. You get full control over the investments. You can invest in things that you wouldn't get at Fidelity or Schwab or Vanguard. But it's a higher level.
Yep. All right. Well, then the next one, the third vehicle, is the private operating foundation. We see this, the donor advised fund for our entrepreneurs is by far the most popular. This is the second most popular vehicle. And this generally is going to be for entrepreneurs who have made it their mission, generally kind of post-liquidity event, to really just drive a foundation. That is their new life calling. And so we're going to go through a case study of what that looks like. So here, more advantageous from a tax perspective. We can write off up to 50% of our cash. Our securities is 30%. But here, 85% of inbound inflows, whether from passive sources or contributions, must be spent on active charitable programs. So you're not really going to be able to build up a huge reserve here. And then also, there's two different tests you need to meet every single year: the income test and there's really a few other additional tests. So outside the scope a little bit, but at the end of the day, you got to make sure that there's 4 different tests that you go through, or that you pass at least one of the 4 every single year, just to make sure that, again, that money is being used to conduct these charitable programs that you're operating.
And this is the type of structure you can hire family members to work and pay them W-2 wages and all those kinds of things that are pretty cool. But this is really like running a business when it comes to around charity. And I see this a lot with entrepreneurs who want to provide the actual charitable functions that they would do. So they might have a particular, let's say, category of people. Let's say it's kids on the spectrum or whatever. And they're actually providing services to help those kids. And they're running a company to provide that. So it's a much higher bar, but also you can do more things with it.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why it's the operating foundation, because like you said, you are actually operating. You are a 501c3. So if someone gives you money to your operating foundation, right, they're going to get that tax deduction. Whereas a private foundation, a non-operating foundation, that's kind of like a donor advised fund. You can plug money in there. You can make gifts but you're not actually operating. You're not actually executing. But again, you have all the compliance that comes with it.
Right. And those private operating foundations, you better make sure you have a lot of time. If you're running your active business, it's probably not the time to do that. As you said, usually post-exit, when you're trying to find your new identity, that we see entrepreneurs doing that.
Yep, exactly. So we've got a decision framework here that we're going to throw up. Just a quick and dirty, just shows if you want simplicity, donor advised fund, that's the easy way to go. 80% of our entrepreneurs are going that route. Multi-generational family involvement, full control. There's an argument here between the donor advised fund and the private foundation. I think you and I would make an argument that the donor advised fund is a good enough solution. The private operating foundation, again, if you want the family to get paid and to have some sort of benefits, again, there's a bunch of rules and regulations around that. But also, like you said, there's a specific mission that you want to execute on and not just give money, but actually operate in. That's where that private operating foundation comes into play. And then from a tax perspective, the donor advised fund and then the private operating foundation, the most valuable there.
Yeah, as far as deductions that you can take.
Yep.
All
right, well, let's transition here into an actual case study here. We're going to call this this client Sarah. We're going to put a pseudonym on her. This is a real life 8-figure exit. And she, as part of this exit plan, wanted to really have the next season of life be all about running an operating foundation. So again, what we did here is, as part of the deal, and this was a sale to private equity for $30 million, as part of that transaction and sale, she has an S corporation. But when you are generally selling to private equity, they're going to do something called an F reorganization that essentially allows you to set up a new entity and you contribute your S corp stock for essentially stock, and then you drop it into this subsidiary single member LLC underneath it. And it's a tax-free reorganization, because then the buyer of the business wants to buy the company, take the EIN, but they don't want any of the contingent liabilities that come with it. And they generally want to do an asset sale or an asset purchase generally, just because that'll help them with their allocation of basis. So as part of this F reorganization, which the private equity company wanted to do, it was really important that as an entrepreneur, you understand that you can't contribute your S corp stock to a foundation, or else you're going to trigger what's called unrelated business taxable income, which essentially is just UBTI, which just means that even if I ideally want to give stock in my S corp to a foundation ahead of a sale, because then that means I don't have to pay the taxes on it, well, then the foundation has to pay taxes on it if it's an S corp. But by doing this F reorganization, it was technically a single member LLC that was given a portion of that. So $5 million of value in this single member LLC that was created as part of this F reorganization was contributed to this new operating foundation that she created. So then what happens is when the $30 million came in, $5 of that $30 million is now owned by this other entity. And again, that $5 million is owned by the foundation. So $5 million of cash goes into the foundation, $25 million of cash goes into the entrepreneur. She doesn't have to pay capital gain taxes on that $5 million that goes to the foundation. So that is the workaround to avoid the UBTI. So a little complicated, a little bit of technical jargon. I know
definitely.
We'll see who stuck with us on that. But at the end of the day, I think with the proper structuring, with an M&A team and a tax and legal team, there's ways that you can do this in a tax-favored
you would not want to do that on your own, for sure.
So the result here, again, is $5 million now is seeded into this private operating foundation. Now, she, again, is involved in the day-to-day operations. And so we took that $5 million and invested it all in like high yield or high income investments. And then we just need to make sure that over 85% of the income or the yield is then used on operations. But she didn't want to have to keep putting more money in. So that $5 million seed amount, then multiplied by, let's say, a blended average yield of 9%, creates a $450,000 a year operating budget that she is then using in her operating foundation. So that was the methodology there. She is soliciting contributions from third parties, friends, family, etc., but she's got enough money getting generated passively, and that money is, again, appropriately being spent down to just fund the day-to-day operations and active operations. So that way, that's how we pass all these different tests.
Yeah, and if you think about it, this was something that really made a difference in her life. Like, this was a mission that she wanted to achieve and accomplish, and she was able to do that and still have a majority of the money for herself for the way she wants to live her life.
Yep. All right. So that's an advanced charitable and pre-exit sale planning strategy there. A lot of sophistication, but let's take it back. Let's take it back a little bit to the basics. And so what I want to do here, Jim, is take a hard transition and something that I can't get out of my mind, which is the number of entrepreneurs that we work with or that come in our doors that do not have basic estate plans put in place. And this hits me a lot more now as a young father. I would say that my estate plan I get it. If I wasn't a father, I never really cared that much. But now being a dad, it's super important. And as you know, there's some juicy celebrity. That was a weird. That's a tough word for me right there. A few celebrity
you just went
stories.
through all this stuff about F reorgs and you couldn't say that word.
We all have our challenges.
Yeah.
So what I want to do is just go.
It's like you can't tie your shoes, but you can do calculus or something.
Let's go through each of these documents one by one in terms of the importance of them, and then I'm going to pull out a few real life, high profile case studies that illustrate what happens and how quickly this can go wrong. So first document, Jim, I want you to break down is the last will and testament.
So the last will and testament really is about telling the probate court how you want to distribute your assets. So probably for most of you, you're going to need something called a revocable living trust that we're going to talk about next. And your will would be a pour over will. So if you forget to put something into the trust, that the will would tell the probate court, hey, I forgot to do that. Would you please pour that into my trust? In addition, though, it does have things like who's going to take care of your kids And I was wondering, are Mimi and I anywhere on that list where we have to take care of your kids?
You are on the depth chart, but not in the top 3 positions.
Okay, good.
So
good.
just not in writing yet.
Good. I didn't mean good. I meant, oh, darn. I wish we could take care. We're too old. You want our kids to, you don't want me to be in a walker trying to help your kid throw a baseball or something. So that is an important part of the last will and testament is, who's going to take care of your kids and stuff like that. You'll name either an executor or a personal representative, depending on what state. If you don't even have a will, then you go through intestate probate, which is intestate is a Latin word for really, really bad probate. You don't want to do that. It's the state laws that will tell how your money is going to be distributed, who's going to get it, how it's going to be managed, and all those kinds of things. So you have to have a will, but generally it's going to be a pour over will.
Yep. All right. Well said. And I think the biggest thing is if you don't have this, the state laws are going to dictate what happens to your money. Everything is going to be public because probate is a public process and probate is expensive. So those are the sticks, so to say, of what happens if you don't have a last will and testament. And as a father, like I said, the biggest decision, which was interesting, was actually guardians. That was, to me, a lot bigger decision than the trustee.
Definitely.
Because the trustee, to me, is someone who handles the money, and I trust making good financial decisions. But guardians is the one who's responsible for raising your kids.
Right.
And that, to me, was the biggest decision, even more so than trustee. And before I had children, I never really thought of it that way. I was always under the impression that the trustee is the biggest decision you make. And sometimes it's the same people. But in my situation, I actually wanted to bifurcate the roles and responsibilities just to mitigate the chance of any type of abuse. And so I wanted to isolate who had control of the pocket, the purse, so to speak, which would be the trustee, separate from the guardian who's making the decision. So that way the guardian can go to the trustee asking for money for certain things for the kids if Lane and I are no longer here. But I didn't want there to be that self-fulfilling, that do loop that they can just be like, oh, I think I need that new Cadillac and the boys need that for a smoother ride. So here's 150 grand I'm going to pull out of the trust for them kind of a thing.
Most definitely. Yep. It's important.
Let's go into the revocable living trust. So you did a great job. I think you just need to keep the momentum.
Sure.
Why do entrepreneurs need a rev trust?
A revocable living trust, and I'll just dispel a rumor or a myth, and that is a lot of entrepreneurs think that a revocable living trust has asset protection. It does not have asset protection until somebody dies. After someone dies, there can be asset protection, but while you're alive, your revocable living trust has no asset protection. There's other things you have to do for that. The main things that revocable living trusts do is they allow you to avoid probate. So they allow for private transfer of all your wealth, so you don't have to have it public through the probate process. Quick, easy, private. In addition, it allows you to, a revocable living trust can hold the assets beyond your death. If you transfer your wealth through a will, it just gets distributed. So if your kid's 21 years old, the money is just going to get handed out to your kids. With a revocable living trust, you can put on rules and stipulations and people to manage the money, and it can be doled out over years. So it allows kind of to be you managing the money beyond the grave, so to speak. That's a really important part of a living trust. It also can preserve your $15 million now exemption. So if you're a married couple, if you have a trust, you can protect that part of the distribution by using a trust that you lose if you don't have the trust. What else would you add to revocable living trust?
I'd say the funding of the trust. Because
right.
far too often we see entrepreneurs, hey, do you have a trust? Yeah. And then they do have a trust. They have the document. They signed it. They notarized it. And then you look up the title to their real estate, the title to their investment accounts, the title to the private equity, the crypto, and it's all in their personal name. So they have the trust on a piece of paper, but if the trust doesn't own anything, then it can't govern anything. So it's not just about creating these documents, but then funding the trust, which just means retitling the appropriate assets in the name of the trust. So the trust owns those assets, not you as an individual.
Yeah, that's really smart. And we see that mistake all the time. In addition to that, you name trustees, and those would be the people who would manage the assets, follow the rules, decide when to give money to your kids, for example. And you want to think in threes. This person, if this person is unwilling or unable, then this. If this person is unwilling and unable, then the third person. Think in threes. You want to at least have threes. People get old, people die, people may be in a life situation where they can't do it, and they can say, I'm not going to do it, and then you go to the next person. So trustee is a critical piece. And then another thing that I like put into a lot of trust is a trust protector. And a trust protector really doesn't have anything to do unless there's a problem with the trustees and the beneficiaries. And the trust protector usually has only two jobs. One would be change of situs, like if there's a reason to move the trust to a different jurisdiction. And two, which is the most important one, is replacing trustees. So the beneficiary could come to the trust protector and say, hey, this trustee is not giving me money that I need. Then the trust protector goes in, looks at the trust, looks at the situation, can say, beneficiary, no, you're wrong, trustee's doing a good job, or replace the trustee. So I like that position in most revocable living trusts.
Yep, I love it. All right, next document, power of attorney, specifically the financial power of attorney. So I'll take this one. This really governs all of the assets and your finances that are not owned by your trust if you're incapacitated. So the easiest way to describe this is, well, if the trust owns real estate or any type of asset, your business, let's say, if you're incapacitated, then the successor trustee gets to step into the shoes of all the assets that are owned by that trust, of which your business could be one of them. Now, if that's the case, make sure you have qualified subchapter S stock trust language built in. If you are an S corp and it's owned by your trust, so just check the docs there. Whereas the financial power of attorney is anything that's not owned by your trust. Well, hey, I'm incapacitated. Who can actually, handle my affairs while I'm incapacitated? That's where the financial power of attorney comes into play. And I think that the decision, or one of the big decisions here, is, do I want it to be durable or do I want it to be springing? And what that means is durable, whether or not I'm incapacitated, it's going to be alive or there at all times. And this is beneficial if you're, for example, in Europe all the time and you need someone to go close a real estate deal for you and sign and notarize docs. Well, your power of attorney can do that in person. The flip side is springing, and springing is going to be based off of a definition. And so then it's important to understand, well, what is the definition? And normally it's two independent doctors certifying that you're incapacitated, which means that that document is null and isn't valid until that threshold is met, which is generally two independent doctors saying you're incapacitated. Then that power of attorney comes into full force. So that's usually a decision that clients have to make. Do I want this power of attorney to be kind of on file and live at all times? You only would want to do that if you really, really trust, the people who have your power of attorney, probably your spouse, and maybe nobody else. Whereas the flip side, the springing is, to me, a little bit more logical that if I'm incapacitated, then this happens.
Yeah, definitely with spouses, we usually see a standing or a durable power of attorney rather than the springing. And if it's other family members, often we see the springing for those reasons. And do you have certain doctors you want involved? Like you can participate in how you set up the language in this document to what is the triggering event, who has to decide whether the financial power of attorney becomes valid if it springs into effect. And then some other things like gifting. Does the agent have the ability to gift to him or herself? And there might be situations where your child, when you're older, and your adult children, maybe you want them to be able to gift to themselves for tax planning or estate planning purposes. Maybe you don't, because that introduces the opportunity for abuse. So is there the ability to gift to others or to the children or anything like that under the financial power of attorney?
Yep. All right. Next one, healthcare power of attorney. So Jim, break that one down for us.
Yeah, so this is really designated who's going to make medical decisions for you. And with the HIPAA laws that went into place a couple decades ago, there's some teeth in these rules. So even if someone, let's say two people are living together and they show up at a hospital because one got in a car accident, you don't have a healthcare power of attorney. You have not designated that person to make decisions for you in this medical situation. Even with spouses, it can be challenging because hospitals are afraid of getting sued. So not only does it designate the person, and again, think in threes, this person, then that. In addition, you want to know what's the language in there? What guidance are you giving to that person? Because often, Mimi and I have been married for 33 years. How often have we had conversations about like, okay, you're in the hospital in this situation. What do you want as far as your medical care? How do you want your pain management to be handled? Those kinds of things. We don't really talk about that. So all of a sudden the spouse is in there. There's no guidance for the spouse to make those decisions. So the healthcare power of attorney is critically important, gives you the power to make the decisions alongside of the doctors, and also gives guidance. So this should be something that you look at and you're thoughtful about, before you put into effect. And usually when you go into the hospital or to see a doctor or you have a surgery, they're going to ask you, do you have a power of attorney? And often it's good to give them a copy of it in case something goes wrong, for whatever the reason that you're there for.
Yep. All right. Last document, living will, advanced life directive. This really is just all about documenting your end of life wishes. This is organ donation. This is, do you want anything to be preserved? Some people want their brain to be preserved in a cryo chamber, pull the plug, all of that type of stuff is spelled out here. And this is where the entrepreneur, you are going to have to make some decisions and make some initial next to some of these different things. And then that way, if you're incapacitated, it's very clear what some of your wishes are.
Yeah. That allows you to tell a doctor or whoever's taking care of you, hey, I want to go. If I'm in this condition, I don't want to be kept alive. And often if you don't have that type of a document, again, you take a spouse, for the spouse to have to make that decision when the spouse doesn't really know what you want would be just a really gut-wrenching decision to make for somebody else. But having it in writing that you've said ahead of time, hey, I don't want to live in this condition. And I'm going to give a little shout out for organ donation. Mimi and I are organ donors. And I see so few people do that. And yet, here's the arguments I hear. Oh, I'm afraid they're going to harvest my organs before I'm dead. I don't think so in this world of lawsuits and everything else. And it saves so many lives if something happens to someone. And if you're not using them anymore, right? If you have any good organs, why not help someone else have an extension to their life or quality of life that they didn't have? Anyway, there's my pitch. It's a personal decision, but I wish more people were organ donors.
You'd be happy to know I am an organ donor. It's on my driver's license.
I like it.
And it's in my advanced.
The older I get, the less I think my organs are that exciting, for people. But it's that diminishing returns.
You need that younger blood, right?
Yes.
Peter Thiel.
People would rather have your liver than my liver.
That is true.
All
right, let's go. But I'm closer to college, so mine's been taxed probably a little bit more.
Oh, there you
recently.
Go. Yeah, maybe
you've had
yours
more
needs
time to heal.
Some recovery from college drinking.
Yeah, I can't do it like I used to. That's for sure. All right, let's talk through the big bad wolf here, the cost of not having these documents. So the rule of thumb, based on some studies here, is that it depends on the value of the estate, but about 3 to 7% of the estate's total value in fees and expenses is a rule of thumb for the cost of probate. So again, how do you avoid probate? Creating a revocable living trust and funding that revocable living trust. So then attorney fees, $250 to $600 an hour. There was a third-party study based in California, which is a kind of a nasty probate state. $1.5 million estate, which just means that was the net worth of the individual when they passed away. If they did not have a trust and they had a will, but it went through probate, you can see $56,000. It was the average statutory probate fee and total expenses. And on top of that, 12 to 24 months to complete that process, which also means that if you do not have a trust, you are going through the probate process. Remember, this is tied up in court until it gets settled. So your beneficiaries aren't even seeing any of the money. Your estate is paying the cost, the legal bills for all of this just to get through probate. And then the people who you want to get your money are not going to get, 100 cents on the dollar because of these different costs. And they're not getting the money for an extra 12 to 24 months, and life can change very quickly.
And not just children, beneficiaries, but sometimes spouses. If someone owns something individually, sometimes the spouse can't get to the money for a year or two. When I see this with California, I think that there should just be a meme on the state of California where it's just California is just like a head just shaking like, what's up with California? Seems like they're always on the wrong side of those lists.
Yeah, we'll do a future episode. I know I've been doing deep dives into the state income tax situation. There's a billionaire tax getting proposed there, and just the revenue and the expense, the P&Ls of states are looking very, very different depending on the different states. And California is one that's.
And I love California. I love to visit, but it just is financially not being managed in a very smart way for a long time.
Yep. All right. Well, let's go into some real world celebratory probate disasters. So. Prince.
Celebratory or celebrity?
Celebrity. It's not celebratory when they passed away. This word is my nemesis today.
I know.
Now I am self-conscious about trying to say celebrity.
Go back to the F reorg.
Celebrity. Yeah, no lie. Stay in your lane. All right. Prince died 2016. No will. No trust, nothing. Estate was estimated to be worth $200-300 million. Right after he dies, what happens? Over 45 people came in and said, hey, I'm supposed to be an heir to the estate. This is what happens in probate. It becomes public that, obviously Prince was worth a lot of money. But for example, if Jim Dew passed away and then it's, oh, wow, this guy's actually worth a lot of money, people will come out of the woodwork. So back in high school, Jim told me he would give me 10% of whatever he had. And now you have to go defend all of this in court. So that's why keeping it secretive, private, using trust is.
I used to party like it was 1999. Shouldn't I get a piece of this?
Exactly. There you go. You owe someone some beer money and compound that with the inflation. So this legal battle lasted 6 years and it was tens of millions of dollars of fees. So Prince had nothing set up. That one was bad. I think what I believe is one of the most famous ones is Michael Jackson. So Michael Jackson was halfway there. He had what a lot of entrepreneurs had. He had a trust, but he never funded it. So he never retitled his assets into the trust. So the piece of paper was worthless. The trust paper was worthless. So this has been 15 years and tens of millions of dollars later, and still they're fighting it out. It's close to wrapped up. I think it's hard to see exactly where this is in the courts, but again, brutal because how are you worth $500 million and your advisors don't confirm that you funded your trust? It's one of the first things that we do when we're going through our entrepreneur situations.
Yeah. I know you got Heath Ledger down here. James Gandolfini is another one where that whole thing was a mess and his daughter was going to get a huge chunk of money at age of majority. And yeah, it's shocking because these people have all kinds of advisors around them that this stuff wouldn't get done. But, I think it just goes to show that people just don't think they're going to die.
Yep. And then I think a common theme is we often hear, well, hey, Jim, I'm single, so I don't really need this stuff, right? So only 26.7% of singles have a will. And I think you and I would both argue that those people are generally at even more risk because the state laws then apply to who gets to handle your affairs if you pass away or incapacitated. And to your point, if you had a significant other, but it's not memorialized and documented, the hospital or no one else is going to know. And now, maybe your estranged mom or dad or sibling is now in charge of your entire estate or your situation.
Well, if you think about singles, the two landmark cases in the last 50 years about the living will were two women in their 20s. So the most recent one was Terry Shrivo, and that went, to the Congress of Florida. I mean, it became this huge thing, this legal battle between the husband and the parents. And if Terry Shrivo would have just completed this living will, which is just a couple of 2 or 3 page document, she would have said, here are my wishes, and it would have ended all of that mess that happened. So single people need this. Think about decisions in the hospital. Well, who's going to make decisions? If you're a single person, maybe you don't get along with your mom or dad. Maybe they show up at the hospital. Who's that person going to be? And you need to designate that. So single people, married people, people with kids, people without kids, everybody needs basic estate documents.
Yep, 100%. All right, question to ask your state attorney. Is my trust actually funded? So I think that is a takeaway. Most of our entrepreneurs do have trusts set up. I'd say maybe about 50 to 60% of them are actually funded. So I think for most people watching, viewing this, that's the actionable takeaway here. I mean, if you don't have any documents, get documents in place. If you do have documents, confirm that those trusts are actually funded.
And you know what? Usually estate attorneys don't even know if they're funded because often they just give a bunch of instructions and say, go fund your trust. So how can you know? Look at the quitclaim deed on your house to see how is your home deeded. Is that in the trust or not? Look at statements from your brokerage account. So if it just has your name or your spouse's name, it's not in the trust. Or if it's just in an individual name, IRAs are different and 401ks are different. They have beneficiaries, and you may or may not want to name a trust as a beneficiary. That's probably a whole nother podcast that we should talk about beneficiaries. But just check those things in the statements that you get to see, is this stuff in there? Is my bank account in there or not? And if it's not, get it in there.
Yep. All right. That's it for this episode of the Make Rich Real podcast. We always wrap up big takeaways. Jim, what are you taking with you from today?
I just love the charitable giving. Every time I see the numbers on the United States, it just makes me proud at how generous we are as people and all these cool things that you can do to leverage your giving.
Yeah, I like it. I agree. I think there's so many different cool and unique structures when it comes to charitable giving. We talked about 3 of them today. We dovetailed a little bit into the trust structures that can be used. But, for our clients that are making a massive impact in the world, they're tithing every single year. Those clients are so much fun to work with because they look at themselves as stewards of the capital and the wealth, and that, a healthy allocation needs to be reallocated to others that are in need more. And it's really fun as an advisor to be able to plan some really cool, sophisticated structures that, allow you to have some great tax benefits and also make a huge impact in the world.
Yeah. And, I like to say giving is the most selfish thing you can do, because if you've ever given to a cause that matters or you volunteered your time to help out, it's just this tremendous feeling. It just makes you feel great. And when you can raise your kids to learn about that, they become better people too.
Yep. 100%. Awesome. All right, Jim.
That was a plug for the people who are going to take care of your kids, since we're way down on the list.
Yeah.
I'll just criticize them.
Okay.
I'll be Monday morning quarterback.
Someone needs to do it. Someone needs to be the grumpy uncle.
No, you're going to be around for a long time. I'm not worried about those kids growing up with other people.
That's the hope.
I just wanted to say that for the record.
Thank you.
Okay.
It is now published that you are not rooting for me.
I don't want to put bad karma out there in the universe.
All right. We're off the rails. That's it for us today. Make Rich Real Podcast.
Thanks, Bryce.
Thanks for listening to the Make Rich Real podcast, where million-dollar businesses meet billionaire strategies. Please note the following disclosure. This podcast is provided by Do Wealth Management, an SEC-registered investment advisor. Registration with the SEC does not imply a certain level of skill or training. The information presented in this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only and should not be construed as personalized investment advice, tax advice, or legal advice, or a recommendation to buy or sell any security. Nothing discussed in this podcast constitutes a solicitation or offer to provide investment advisory services to any person in any jurisdiction where such solicitation or offer would be unlawful under the securities law of such jurisdiction. All information presented is believed to be reliable, but is not guaranteed for accuracy or completeness. All investing involves risk, including the potential loss of principal. Past performance, if mentioned, is not indicative of future results, and no investment strategy can guarantee profit or loss. Any mention of specific securities, investment strategies, or market performance is for illustrative purposes only and should not be considered a recommendation. Economic and market conditions are subject to change, and any opinions expressed are currently only as of the date of this recording. Before making any investment decisions, please consult with a qualified financial professional who can assess your individual circumstances, risk tolerance, and investment objectives. For more information about our services and fees, please refer to our ADV Part 2A, which is available at our website, dowealth.com, or upon request.